So here is Section 4, Analysis and Meaning Making Part 2. So we've talked about semiotics, semiology, and how we make meaning out of signs and symbols, icons, indexes, things like that. So now we're going to move on to other types of qualitative analyses and how those are performed. So one of the first things we can talk about is a genre analysis as a type of qualitative analyses in terms of how we make meaning of things. So if we're listening to an album or watching a movie or a TV show or reading a novel, because almost what Kristeva said about intertextuality, that everything is influenced by those things prior to it. Well, that can also come into play when we talk about genre analysis. And genre, again, is just, how a movie fits into a category, or a TV show or an album fits into a category. So, you have genres like horror, mystery, suspense, romance, comedy, things like that. If you look at albums, you have genres like rock and roll, pop, hip hop, country, things like that. So with a genre analysis, what you're doing is you're looking at that media text or that piece, and you're trying to compare it to how it would typically fit into the genre. Okay, so you're analyzing a relationship of different texts to one another and the ways in which they're clustered into groups or types. And so you're looking at how something fits that group or type, or how it counters that group or type. And so by looking at those comparisons, you can come up with ideas and meanings, and what you think is trying to be done. So things that are kind of typical within a genre would be something like narrative structure. So there's a certain way that Westerns are told. There's a certain way that horror movies are told. And we're all kind of familiar with how that plot develops. If you're going to watch a slasher film, a horror film, you kind of know that, there's the beginning of the monster or whatever's killing people. You kind of learn just a little bit about that. And then you usually go on to some people taking a trip somewhere in a remote place, or going out, and you spend a little bit of time with them and getting to know those characters. And then we introduce the villain, and then it's a one-by-one kind of killing spree until you get to the very end, and you try to see who wins out, the monster or typically the heroine. And it's typically the heroine, although in most narrative structures of slasher or horror movies, you realize that the villain's not really dead. He's going to come back, right? Subject matter is a kind of typical thing that you'll see in genres. So, it could be in a Western. It could be a stranger comes to town and eventually has to fight bad guys that are there in the town. If you look at a mystery, then the subject matter is, you're solving some crime. Setting's also important. So in Westerns, we're always going to be in kind of the frontier area, in the Wild West, right? So canyons, mountains, desert, prairie, things like that. You don't see too many Westerns taking place in New York City, right? It's always out in the West. Same thing for horror movies, settings. You're probably going to see out in the woods somewhere, and a majority of the scenes are probably going to be nighttime scenes. Editing. So, for example, editing tricks in horror movies where you have jump scares, where you're not thinking something's about to jump out, and then it jumps out and it scares you. Or we go little editing tricks, like someone goes up and they're looking in the bathroom vanity mirror, and they open up the mirror. It's really a medicine cabinet. They get something out, and then when they close the medicine cabinet, you see the monster's reflection in the back. And just choice of shots, and that kind of goes hand in hand with visual features. What are you going to see in horror movies? Lots of blood, lots of gore. What are you going to see in westerns? Guns, revolvers, pistols, duels, things like that. And then music. Westerns have their own style of music. Horror movies have their own style of music. Murder mysteries have kind of somber music to it. Comedies have lighter music, maybe even rock and roll in them. So you see how these things they all prescribe to a certain style. So what I like to do is kind of show you some examples, and not trying to pick them apart really, but just show you kind of what happens when you play around with genre. And so this first clip that I want to show you is from a Western called Once Upon a Time in the West, and it's my favorite Western, to be honest. And this is out around 1969 is what it says up here. And so what we have is you have a Western that is being made by an Italian director. There's this kind of subgenre of Westerns that comes about called spaghetti Westerns. And this was a big thing in the late 60s, but primarily in the 70s, where you had a lot of Italian directors really kind of admired the Western genre. It's something that they didn't have in Italy. They didn't have a Western genre. So a lot of Italian directors would try to make Westerns just because they admired them so much. A lot of them were kind of hokey, and they just weren't that great. And they didn't seem to really fit what a true Western is. And that subgenre became known as spaghetti Westerns because of the Italian influence. But there's one that stands out as being really, really a good film, and that is Once Upon a Time in the West. Sergio Leone directs this movie. And you can see the hand of someone who is used to big Italian drama, trying to put his take on a Western, but you still feel all these, what we would call classical Italian influences, right? So it bends the genre. It's a Western, but it doesn't really look or feel or sound like a typical Western. And I can kind of, I'll start the trailer and show you that and kind of stop it along the way to kind of tell you what I mean. And so this would kind of be the first example right here. Okay? Westerns didn't really take long, sweeping close-up shots. If you think about all the traditional Westerns that would have came before this in the 50s and the 60s, it's you know, a medium-sized shot of guy riding on his horse down the trail, or two guys in a shootout or whatever. So Leone was very intent on trying to get not just a story, but get emotion out of this thing. And the way he was trying to accomplish that was by visuals, but also by a whole bunch of stuff. It really is kind of a well done film in that we have here a bad guy, and we follow him from the knees all the way up to his face. The other thing you're also hearing is a harmonica playing in the background. And this harmonica is a theme that's played over and over and over again. The notes are off. It's not a pleasant melody. And that harmonica represents a character who is kind of the main focus of this film. The character has no name. And the only thing that you really are left with is the fact that he always has this harmonica tied around his neck, and he plays it so often. He plays those same notes. So that character becomes known as Harmonica. That's the name that they give him. And all you know about him is that he wants revenge against one guy. You're never told why he wants that revenge or why there's a harmonica around his neck until the very last of the movie. Then you figure out. So it's almost like this is one of the first Westerns that's made with a twist ending. So we'll go forward here. That's harmonica right there. That's the bad guy that eventually he wants to kill. Sound is very important here. There's not a lot of background music.
The boom towns. A new life.
So, I forget her last name. Her first name's Claudio. And this is an Italian actress who had to learn English and had to learn the lines phonetically. She really didn't speak much English. But she is the female lead in this Western. And the interesting thing about this is the female lead, she is also a prostitute. She's a prostitute from New Orleans. Falls in love with a man who owns land out in the West. When he's visiting New Orleans, they get a quick marriage. And his wife has already died, I think. He was a widower. And so he gets remarried. This woman comes to stay and live on the ranch. But thinking in terms of how usually Westerns of the 50s and 60s were all about good and bad, and there were clear roles. Now you have this female lead that actually has kind of a tainted past in that she was a prostitute. You also saw there like these wide boom shots when it said the boom town, and it's using a crane or a boom to shoot that. And that's another thing you see in Westerns, or in this Western. How this one is different is that it has very grand scenes, backdrops, right? You didn't really see too many crane shots being done in Westerns. But he's treating this almost like it's a Gone with the Wind kind of epic thing. So it stands out there too.
And the promised land. Once upon a time.
It's an interesting shot. You're seeing this guy run, and so the camera is running with him, but the camera's actually behind the bushes. So that's the bad guy and the prostitute female lead.
The gunman. The man in search of a name.
Extreme close-ups.
A film by Sergio Leone who gave a new face to the West.
So, and that was kind of what they were referring to there is kind of interesting too. It's the first kind of Western where your hero is really an anti-hero. And he's kind of saying in that scene where he had her and pinned her down, was holding her chest, is that, he could, if he wanted to, he could rape her. And that's kind of what was implied in that scene. He chooses not to, because he ultimately is a good character. But he's kind of toying with her and showing her, you don't really mean anything to me. I'm not here for you, right? I'm here for revenge, and you're just something that's on the side. There's also, I showed you the bad guy and the female lead together. That is almost like an implied rape scene too, in that he is trying to seduce her and she's resisting, but in the middle of the scene, she gives in. She decides that she is going to, make love with him or whatever. And they don't show a sex scene per se. It's still a 1969 Western. But it's heavily implied that, she plays the field, and she kind of turned that situation to her advantage, so to speak. Because the reason why she ends up sleeping with him is so she can get something out of it. So you have these morally contested characters.
With a fistful of dollars, for a few dollars more, and the good, the bad, and the ugly. Starring Claudia Cardinale.
There you go.
Henry Fonda.
This is also very against genre. Henry Fonda had never played a villain up until this movie. Henry Fonda was always thought of as this very pure, chaste hero character, high moral values. And Leone, approached him and said, "You want to make another Western?" And Fonda said, "I've done so many Westerns where I'm the good guy." He said, I don't want to do another one." And Leone told him, No. You're going to be the bad guy. And so that surprised a lot of people who were fans of Western at the time.
Charles Bronson and Jason Robards. A manhunt. A vendetta.
The final duel, and I paused it just at the right time, that's really the only time in the duel that you see both of them in the same shot. For the majority of the time, if I can back it up here just a little bit, for the majority of the time, you are scanning between this right here, where you just have the shot of faces. So Harmonica's face, the bad guy's face would go closer to Harmonica, and then that tension of who's going to draw first. There's that tension, but it's not the tension of trying to, like in a traditional Western, follow their hand. Who's going to move their hand first and draw? What Leone's doing is Leone's making you work for it as a viewer here. You're having to watch their facial expression, and you're going, oh, okay, I'm going to have to see who winces first, who moves their face awkwardly first. That's going to indicate to me who drew first. But then he pops back out to an over-the-shoulder or over-the-hip shot, really, from the bad guy.
In a new land, in a new kind of Western.
You see, it even knew. It said, in a new kind of Western. So, that's an example right there. You see all the Italian names on that. So that's an example of what I'm talking about, in that you have this thing that is a Western, but it breaks a lot of the characteristics of a Western. So you can think of other examples of that too, like the X-Files, where what you have is you kind of have a mystery show, you kind of have a science fiction show, kind of combined and rolled into one. And so it also provides an excellent kind of point to make a genre analysis, to look at where it fits whodunit shows and where it fits sci-fi shows and where it may break there. The next type of analysis I'd like to talk about is a narrative analysis. And so we talked about narrative when we were talking about genre, but we can actually pull narrative apart and look at it as almost a subset. We are all kind of trained, going back as children, that stories happen linearly. A happens, then B happens, then C happens, and that D is the end. And we're told, not just in that narrative of the timeline of how things progress, but we have standard character types: the good guy, the bad guy, the love interest, the comic foil. You kind of have these things that exist that help push along the story. And probably one of the best examples is just look at something like The Three Little Pigs and how it follows that. They leave their own home to go build their own homes, and we have one that builds of straw and one of wood and one of brick, and we follow the destruction of all that until you get to the brick house. So the little pigs are, they represent a character type. Two of them not being the smartest, but the third pig being really smart, and he builds his house of bricks, and of course that's what survives. So it's almost like he's the sole hero in there. And then you have the big bad wolf who's the villain, and you follow a structure, right, where he goes to the first house and huffs and puffs and it blows down. He goes to the second house, he huffs and puffs and it blows down. He goes to the third house, huffs and puffs, but it doesn't blow down. So you have a repetition of things also in there. And that's all part of how we tell stories, and that's really what we mean by narrative analysis. Is really just looking at the methodology of how we tell stories, the process involved in telling those stories. And so with a narrative analysis, you're looking for, how does the narrative in this media message fit with other narratives? How does it differ from other narratives? And we can really look at kind of normality. How is this story supposedly going to be normally told? How would you normally tell this story? And then looking and saying, okay, that's how you would tell the story, but this media piece chose not to tell it that way. It disrupted the normality of storytelling. And then trying to figure out, like, how is it reinstated? How do they fix that by the end? So one of the examples I like to use in narrative analysis, and really you can apply it to a lot of this director's films, Christopher Nolan. Christopher Nolan, in addition to the Batman movies that he made, he also has made some other key movies. Memento, Inception, Interstellar, and those movies kind of mess around with narrative and how you tell narrative. And probably one of the most interesting of those to me is Inception. If you haven't seen Inception, Inception is this movie that is centered around the ability to go into other people's dreams. And either plant a thought in that person's head or take something that's in their head, like a secret. And so you have this technology that lets you go into others' dreams. And eventually, as the technology progresses and these people become masters of this, what can happen is you can go inside of a dream, inside of one person's dream, and while you're in there, maybe there's other people in there with you. And while you're in that first person's dream, let's call him Bill. Bill's having a dream. You go into Bill's dream with 4 of your friends. And when you're in that dream, you put one of your friends asleep and go inside of his dream. So now you're within a dream that's within a dream. And it gets confusing. It's Inception's kind of really hard to explain to anyone. It's one of those movies that you just kind of have to watch. And it's interesting because the first time you watch it, you think, oh my God, this just blew my mind, how incredibly deep this movie was in terms of all the storylines that were going on. I've seen it several times. The more you see it, the more it leaves you with more questions of, well, they really didn't address this, or they didn't tie this up nice. But for the first time you see it, it just really plays with your mind. Because there's this kind of suspension of time. Time takes longer in some dreams than in other dreams. And so it's very complex. In fact, there's so many things that are going on in terms of manipulating dreams, manipulating time, manipulating environments. You know, when you're in dreams, you can manipulate all these things. And it gets to a point where the characters that do this for a living, they really have a tough time figuring out when they're in a dream and when they're awake in reality, when they're in the real world versus a dream world. And to help them cope with this, they have all picked or chosen what they call totems, personal items that they carry with them that are very well known to them and really just them. And so they're constantly checking that totem to see if it's maintaining the characteristic that they knew in the real world. For example, one guy has a pair of loaded dice. So he knows, hey, here's dice that I have, and I know they have a certain weight to them that's different than what a normal weight to a pair of dice would be. So he knows that if he goes into a dream and his dice just feel like regular dice, that he's not in reality. It's when he can feel the true weight and how they're balanced with that weight that he understands. We have the shot here of Leo DiCaprio, and he's one of these people. In fact, he's one of the best at going into dreams. But he's got some secrets and ghosts that kind of follow him whenever he is in a dream, because he's done it so often. But his personal totem is this jack right here. So, and what he does is he takes that jack, and whenever he starts to question, where am I? Am I in a dream or reality? He takes that jack and he spins it. In reality, that jack is going to run out of energy and topple over, right? It only spins for a certain amount of time and then it stops. So if he's in a dream and he spins it and it just continuously turns and never runs out of steam, never falls, then he knows this is not reality. Tops don't do that in reality. They fall over, but if it just keeps spinning and spinning and spinning. So that's his totem, right? So to kind of get to this scene right here, this is the very end scene of Inception. He has been doing this last job for this corporation, this person who owns a corporation. And if he pulls the job off, he's going to get what he's always wanted for a long time now, which is they convicted him of a crime that he didn't really commit. You come to find out he didn't commit the crime. So he had to leave the country, and therefore he left his children behind. And you're saying, well, where's the wife? That's the crime he's convicted of. He's convicted of murdering his wife. You come to find out he didn't, and it's no spoiler. You find that out early in the movie. But because of that conviction, he can't return to America and see his children. And so when he's dreaming, that's the thing that he wants the most. I want to see my kids again. And when he has that dream of seeing them again, it's always the same dream. They're always hunched over, playing in the grass outside. He walks in and sees them through the back door, and then the dream usually ends. They don't turn around. He doesn't go. He isn't able to embrace them like he wants. So we get to the end of the movie, and they've accomplished the big feat that he had to accomplish, and he's able to get back into America, and he comes to his house, and this is the scene that you get. He's looking around and saying, this feels like my house, but I'm not sure, so he spins the top. While it's spinning, he sees the scene that he always sees, his kids hunched over playing in the grass. This time, though, they turn around and look at him, which they haven't done that in the past. And so he runs, that's his father-in-law, he runs to grab them. And so he does. He hugs them and he's talking back and forth. They're interacting. And so you're left thinking, okay, well, Obviously, this was reality because we've never seen this before. But then you're shown the top again and it's still spinning. So you're left wondering. And that's how the movie ends. The movie ends with that top just wobbling a little bit, but still upright. You're left wondering if everything that you have seen in this 2.5, almost 3-hour movie, if everything was just a dream, or if it indeed is reality. And that just messes with the narrative. Not only are you going inside of dreams, inside of dreams, inside of dreams, slowing down time, changing environments, all of that, which is, it plays heavily on narrative, but it also, at the same time, you're left wondering, did what I see really, really happen? Okay, so very much so messing around with how you tell a story, and Nolan's beautiful in that. If you watch Interstellar, which is another one of his movies, he messes around and manipulates space and time, and it essentially is like an astronaut movie, but time is warped, space gets warped. We start talking about things existing in 3 dimensions or many, many, many more dimensions than just 3. Time travel is a thing. It's wild. And Memento is also great. That's one of his earlier movies, and it's about a man who has short-term memory issues. He can only remember things in clumps of 5 minutes, and then he forgets. And it's like he hits a reset button on his memory. So he remembers things, and he's trying to figure things out. And then after about 5 minutes, everything goes blank, and he kind of wakes up again and has to refigure these things out. And so because you're dealing with it in little 5-minute segments, Nolan also screws around and puts all the segments backwards. So you start with what should be an ending, and then the kind of the whodunit mystery thing is in 5-minute segments you're working backwards to see what was the event that started all of this. And so it's a very interesting but very mind-bending kind of story. The final thing we'll talk about is discourse analysis. So, and what we're talking about with that is, how do people use language when they're talking about things? And so discourse analysis is analyzing broader beliefs, worldviews, social structures that are embedded in and reinforced in the verbal or written communication process. So how do people talk about things, right? How do they explain things? This relies heavily on linguistics, which is the study of language itself. And so, a very kind of brief way to explain this is, why do people pick the words that they pick to describe things? And it's an analysis of that. Because our language, the English language, is huge. We can choose so many words at almost any point in our sentence, right? So making conscious decisions of what we're going to say or what we're going to write, and not just for English, but for all languages. Choosing what you're going to or how you're going to present something verbally or written. That can be analyzed, and it matters. I'll give you a quick example. Think about the Bible and how, you have the old King James version of the Bible, which is the old English version, right? And then you think about newer revised versions. And, think about someone had to sit there, read the King James or read the original Greek or Aramaic or whatever, read that and translate it. They're consciously having to pick words all the time. What is this word going to translate? How is that going to translate into this? And think about maybe nouns are pretty easy to translate. The term for a boat in English, there's probably a direct word for boat in French that you would use. But think about adjectives and adverbs and how those things kind of have a nuance to them that some things probably get lost in translation. And so you could really, take a key Bible verse or key Bible verses and compare it in King James versus one of the several newer versions and translations, and look for the differences in words, and just try to pick apart, well, why was that word changed? What is the meaning behind them translating the word differently? It also can deal with discourse analysis, looking at metaphors and hyperbole. One of the examples that I like to use, and I'll show you here in a minute, is this common reference that we give to war. We equate a lot of things in life to a war, and it's not really true, right? We've had the war on Christmas, and I don't know if I have that video. I may have to show you. I'm going to pop up this real quick, sorry, and just look through here and see if I have a war on Christmas clip, which I don't think I have right here. Let me go back. No, so I can show you that in class. But it's this comment, this thing that's called the War on Christmas, in which people talk about how Christianity, and I may do just a quick little search here just to see if I can find it. War on Christmas. We'll look at this one.
This morning, a decision by Starbucks to use a minimalist design for its signature holiday cup is stirring up a little bit of a debate. Some evangelical Christians are very upset that the coffee giant is doing away with symbols of the season like the snowflakes, the snowmen, and the other kind of ornaments. Starbucks says this year's simple cup is inclusive. Don Daler is at New York's Bryant Park with a fight over traditional holiday symbols. Don, good morning.
Good morning. It's beginning to look a little like Christmas here at Bryant Park. The pop-up gift shops have opened up. Some decorations are going up all over the place here. But not so at any given Starbucks, where those images of Christmas trees and snowflakes have virtually disappeared. For millions of coffee drinkers, the arrival of Starbucks holiday-themed cups means Christmas is on the way.
It's huge. People who don't even go to Starbucks regularly, they come during the holidays because we have the red cups.
But some critics say the image of this year's holiday cup was like waking up to a lump of coal Christmas morning. Unlike previous years, when the cups came adorned with holiday-inspired images, ranging from snowmen to ornaments, this year's design is just a plain red cup.
It doesn't give me like the, wow, it's Christmas, you know what I mean?
The topic percolated on social media, where evangelical groups accused the company of waging a war on Christmas.
Do you realize that Starbucks wanted to take Christ and Christmas off of their brand new cups? That's why they're just plain red.
On Thursday, former pastor John Feuerstein posted this video to his Facebook page. It's now been viewed 12 million times.
When I went in and I asked for my coffee, they asked for my name, and I told them my name is Merry Christmas. So guess what? Starbucks, I tricked you into putting Merry Christmas on your cup.
In a statement issued to CBS this morning, Starbucks responded, saying, "Our core values as a company is to create a culture of belonging, inclusion, and diversity."
And so, just to get out of this here for what you see there is this kind of phrase, war on Christmas. The thought that we are taking Christ and Christianity out of Christmas. And so there's other times when they've used that phrase, a war on Christmas. Now, I will also preface and tell you this. While that debate at Starbucks was going on, the war on Christmas, it's not like they're trying to totally get rid of the concept of Christmas, because one of their most popular blends of coffee that they sell during the holidays, the actual name of the blend is Christmas Blend. So if they're trying to get rid of the thought or the concept of Christmas during the holidays, they're doing a real poor job of it, because they've named the product itself Christmas. There's other people that have kind of looked at some things, and there's a guy named Frank Lutz who he does focus groups on people, and he gets to figure out through those focus groups words that people approve of and disapprove of. For example, he's responsible for changing global warming into a phrase of climate change. And so he was telling politicians that were aligned with big oil, don't mention this as global warming. Don't talk about it as global warming. Just talk about it as climate change. It sounds less crucial, less offensive, less threatening if you just call it climate change versus global warming. He also was responsible for taking what's the inheritance tax. So I think at the time that they were passing this, the rule was anything that you inherited over $250,000, you had to pay a tax on if you inherited over that amount. And so what Luntz did was to say, okay, well, people talk about it as inheritance tax, which makes people think, well, it's a tax because you inherited all this money and you didn't have to work for it. And so that kind of has one connotation to it. The way he spun it for his base of voters was, he told the politicians, don't call it inheritance tax. It's not a tax on being wealthy. It's a tax on the fact that someone who gave you all that stuff, it's a tax on the fact that they died. So what you're really saying is this is a death tax. If you died and you just so happen to leave your money to someone, they tax that. And so they're taxing you even when you die. And both of these things were successful, changing from warming to climate change and inheritance tax to death tax. And just to finish out, I'll show you, I'll go back to this kind of phrase war on and show you another example of choosing the wrong words, really. This is Kellen Winslow, and this is an old clip. He no longer even plays in the NFL, but this was when he was in college at the University of Miami. And he's going to make several references here to being soldier, being in a war. Now, the time period that he's saying all this, there actually is a war going on in the Middle East, right? It's right after 9/11. So the timing of his choice of words is not taken that well.
You make money off that.
Back it up.
Also a moment to create a little controversy in this game. Kellen Winslow Jr. will throw a terrific block on Tennessee's Corey Campbell and actually gets a couple of volunteers on this play. He sort of stood over Campbell afterwards, who was injured, and after the game, the post-game media session, Winslow was asked if he realized that Campbell had been injured on the play.
Down on the... Yeah, I don't give a hell. It's about this you, man. I don't give a flying you-know-what about a ball. I don't give a damn. He'd do the same thing to me. It's war. They don't give a freaking you-know-what about you. They will kill you. They're out there to kill you. So I'm going to kill them. You write that in the paper. You write that. You make money off that. No, man, I'm pissed. All y'all take this down. I'm pissed, man. We don't care about nobody except this you. We don't. If I didn't hurt him, he'd hurt me. They're gunning for my legs. I'm gonna come right back at him. Soldier.
And You can kind of see them slapping the desk there at the end and taking in a sigh. That I don't have that part, but the anchors did not take that reference very well. Again, it's just you're using rhetoric that is not necessary. So, analyzing that choice of words, that's part of discourse analysis. So we're going to end right there. That's the end of the slides that I have for Section 4. So everyone have a good day, and I will see you in class.